This is lecture 11. I call it Noah's Flood. I guess there's a couple different contexts for this. We talked about origin myths in an earlier lecture, so this kind of fits in with that. This also deals, in my traditional classes, I talk about this to give an example of epistemology. Epistemology meaning the investigation into how we know things. For the longest time, we knew of Noah's flood simply through Scripture. Now, it appears that science is making an argument for an immense flood in Southwest Asia, I believe about 7,000 years ago, maybe 7,500 years ago. So this is kind of an example of how epistemology works, different ways of knowing the world. I want to start with Ryan-Pitman's argument in their book, Noah's Flood, New Scientific Theories about the Event That Changed History. Here's the date. The Great Flood took place, according to their calculations, about 5,600 years ago in the Black Sea. Ryan-Pitman theorized that the Bosporus land bridge, and you can see a picture of it here, this narrow land bridge burst. And that due to rising sea levels as the final ice age ended, and due to seismic activity in this area, and we know this area is highly seismic, that the land bridge burst, and that the saltwater of the Mediterranean blasted through this channel and turned what had been a reasonably shallow freshwater lake into what we now call a very deep Black Sea. You can imagine a catastrophe of this magnitude of the people living along the shores of this freshwater lake. The Black Sea, of course, is legendary. Jason and the Argonauts sailed the Black Sea in search of the Golden Fleece. We have legends of dragons and Amazons. The Black Sea, of course, is situated precisely where Europe stops and Asia begins. It's unique because in its depths, its waters are poisonous. The waters are anoxic, that is, without oxygen. The top few hundred feet of water in the Black Sea can sustain life. But once you go deeper than that, it's poisonous. Now, I want to mention some similarities here between the flood story in Genesis, the Noah's story that you guys are probably familiar with, and then a much older story from Babylonia or from Sumeria called the Epic of Gilgamesh. There's striking similarities between these two ancient works, and they're worth considering. In Gilgamesh, the gods decide in anger to destroy humanity in a flood, but one individual, Utnapishtim, who's analogous to Noah in this story, he survives in a large boat. In Genesis, God, in his anger, decides to destroy all humanity in a flood, except for Noah and his family, who survive in an ark. Utnapishtim's boat lands on Mount Nasir after the flood. Noah's ark lands on the mountains of Ararat after the flood. Utnapishtim sends out a dove, a swallow, and a raven to see if the waters have receded. And of course, Noah also sends out birds, a raven and a dove. In the Babylonian story, after the floodwaters recede, the ark comes to a rest. A sacrifice is made. Noah does the same thing. In Gilgamesh, the gods smell the sacrifice and they bless the survivors. In Genesis, the Hebrew God, Yahweh, smells the sacrifice and blesses creation. In Gilgamesh, Gilgamesh himself has a chance for immortality. He's told he has to dive to the bottom of the sea and retrieve a particular plant, which then he can later eat and achieve immortality. But he fails because once he resurfaces, he sets the plant down and it's snatched away by a serpent robbing Gilgamesh of immortality. Of course, we have the same story in Genesis, whereby Adam had a chance to gain immortality by eating from the tree of life, but fails also because of the cunning of the serpent. Now, in Genesis 7:11, quote, in the 600th year of Noah's life, it was on that day that all the fountains of the great abyss burst forth, and the floodgates of the sky were opened. In Gilgamesh, which was produced about 2000 BCE, quote, with the first light of dawn, a black cloud came from the horizon. It thundered within. The Lord of the storm was rising. And then the gods of the abyss rose up, pulled out the dams of the nether waters, and threw down the dikes. One whole day the tempest raged, gathering fury as it poured over the people. Interesting that both Gilgamesh and Noah use the word abyss, meaning the waters are coming from ground level or even beneath the ground. We generally think of Noah's flood as 40 days and 40 nights of rain. Here it appears the water is at ground level. This indicates perhaps or gives some support to the notion of the Bosporus bursting and the Mediterranean blasting through that valley. I want to talk about social memory here with regard to the flood. In the Zagros Mountains in Iran at the Behestan Rock, there is engraved a script describing a great flood. Indian Sanskrit, a dead language, tells of a people who called themselves Aryans and who experienced a legendary flood. A mother language had existed in the prehistoric past, spoken by unknown people in an unknown homeland who, at some unknown date, dispersed into Europe, Asia, India. What could have caused this dispersal of so many people? Why would separate peoples, scattered across Eurasia, belong to the same language family and take the same myths with them of a great flood? Let's draw some conclusions here about flood and social memory. How would such a flood have looked and sounded? 10 cubic miles of water poured through the Bosporus each day, enough to cover Manhattan Island each day to a depth of over half a mile. The roar of the rushing water would have been audible at 300 miles distance. The rise and the level of the Black Sea would have been approximately 6 inches per day, which would have given people on the outer periphery of the lake time to gather their children, their domesticated animals, their stored wheat, and flee to safety. Did they construct boats and scatter in every direction? Did they take with them a mother tongue that evolved into the various languages, but retained cognates and common grammatical structures similar enough to be of one Indo-European family of languages? Did these scattered peoples take the collective myth or memory of the Great Flood with them? It may account for the fact that there are flood stories throughout Southwest Asia. There are flood stories elsewhere as well. But it's an interesting combination now of science and literature and scripture to try to get at this event that is clearly mythological on the one hand and yet may actually have had physical manifestations on the other with the bursting of the Bosporus and the creation of the Black Sea. So I'll stop there. Thank you.